Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our amazing race recaps here on Rob Has a Podcast as we are breaking things down with the second leg of the Amazing Race 35. Of course, Mike Bloom here, Jessica Liese as well as per usual. Apologies, Rob Cesternino is a bit tied up at the moment, but Jess, it's you and I in this slowly sinking little paddle boat that is this podcast, paddle boat, if you will, trying to keep afloat as we pile all the pomelos we can on board.
Okay, so I guess you're not going to bump this. All right. All right. We don't fist bump.
We don't fist bump, not on podcasts, at least. Maybe that's why it's podcasts and it's older Thai women whose speciality is like weaving Lotus, floral arrangements. Those are the two people you can't fist bump.
Right. They are more high five kind of people, I guess.
And you'd imagine for software engineers who probably work so virtually, like they know that fist bumps don't really work in that capacity from a screen-based perspective, but maybe they're like, it's a post-COVID amazing race. We're back to booking domestic travel. We could fist bump and hug whoever we want.
Yeah, well, I mean, the fist bump was proposed as the substitute for handshakes and hugs. And also, every software bro I've ever known in my life has been a big fan of the fist bump, even before COVID.
Yeah, that's true. So if they ever lied about their jobs, that would have gotten sold out right there, right then.
Oh, yeah, immediately. Like, no, you're not a high school science. Actually, high school science teachers also like the fist bump. Never mind.
That would have been the one thing they could have gotten away with. Well, luckily, Greg and John are not sold up the river or sold up the canal. As we continue our adventures on the Amazing Race 35 through Thailand, this is something we have seen time and time again, Jess, especially in modern Amazing Race. It's the old city mouse, country mouse, 2 legs in 1 country deal, where last time we were in Bangkok, we dealt a lot with the more urban aspects of the city. Now we're going out west, we're going out to the boonies, and we're dealing with a lot more greenery around us in so many ways. What did you think about this episode overall, especially as an extension of the premiere? You usually say that premieres are not indicative of the season as a whole. As our first regular taste of the season from your perspective, what was that taste for you?
Well, Mike, before we do that, I want to zoom out on more of a macro level because I think we said this last week, and I think it was a continuance of last week into this week that the Amazing Race is kind of enjoying this return to form in a lot of really kind of interesting throwbacky ways that really call back to the days when lots of people actually watched this show and it was still relevant. We often make the joke when we talk about Survivor that normies are like, oh, that show's still on. Well, it goes double for the Amazing Race. Like, people do not know the show is still on, even if they watch Survivor, and even if it comes on right after Survivor. But people do generally remember those early aughts Amazing Race seasons with a lot of fondness still, even if they haven't watched the show in years. And they've pulled in a lot of those things that we were always nostalgic for. And they're bringing them back in these new 90-minute episodes. And I know a lot was said last night. When you and I were at the live know-it-alls for Survivor, a lot was said about the return of the opening credits.
Yes.
And I think we need to point out the opening credits are there in Amazing Race as well.
Always been there. They changed them a little bit. We're not doing the infamous head turn with them sort of in their natural home states. It's on a soundstage, but it's there.
Yeah, it's there. And we didn't always have that. We don't get that week to week every season. So I would suspect we're going to get that this season because, hey, that's 2 extra minutes you don't have to fill. But there were some other small things that I thought were really curious. One of the things that I appreciated on a level that does not have any bearing on whether or not this was an entertaining episode or a good gameplay or exciting strategy, but I, for one, was super jazzed to see the return of the departure times.
Oh, yeah. Now, do you think it was 12 hours? Or do you think we're going back to, like, not the old, but sort of, like, obviously pre-COVID days of, like, well, you'll stay for, like, 36 hours, so you leave at a respectable time of day?
I don't think it was 12 hours. Like, the eat, sleep, and mingle of it all. Like, you remember how many times they were leaving at, like, 3 a.m.
Yeah. Only to, like, get stopped immediately by hours of operation.
Right. They'd go to the museum, and the museum's like, hours of operation, 8 a.m. So they're just going to sit there for 5 hours while everybody else catches up. But I thought this was really instructive because it let you know what those time spreads were, and it was not anything surprising. It was about what you would expect. I like this a lot better than people taking off in groups of 15 minutes apart. This was fun. I hope they keep doing this. But I also think it underlined one of the problems I had with this episode, which was there really wasn't a lot of switching up of order. The people in front stayed in the front, the people in back stayed in the back, and there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity. If you had been one of those teams in the back, you were in the back for the entire leg. A couple of people improved like one or two spots, but if you were on that second flight, it's like effectively you are still on that second flight.
Yeah, to the point where the next time on is going to indicate like the flight shakeup is the thing. It's the coconut chop challenge to finally put, the back of the pack people into the lead. I agree. I mean, look, I was happy to get to know these teams a bit more. I can't help but say I was a little disappointed that now we're getting into the more of the 90-minute stuff. It's like, okay, so we're not putting more tasks in. We'll review the tasks before we get through the teams, but it again was roadblock, detour, pit stop, and that was it. And granted, it did allow for like more fun downtime moments, like feeding the catfish and Todd doing like the bro at the bar of like, oh, if I down this entire thing of catfish food, will you give me the express pass? Like, that type of stuff. I enjoy those downtime moments. Again, we spoke about that a lot with Survivor last night as well. But I did feel like it's interesting we're talking so much about things from pre-COVID Amazing Race coming back in departure times, because last night's episode reminded me so much of the Amazing Race 33, that stretch in like the second half of the season when they would depart in groups, but it almost always was, okay, there are teams that are definitively in the front and there are teams that are definitively in the back, and it's pretty much just a battle between them. It is astounding how much, and I will use the word that Phil Kogan did when he was talking at the mat with several of these teams, consistent this leg was. Even the people that were in the front were all operating at pretty much the same speed they were last leg to finish in the exact same place. I know this obviously will not be the status quo, especially next episode when, again, it seems like things are going to be shaken up in a major way. But yeah, I got to say, going back to the point that you've made about the premiere being a bit of an outlier and then the second episode being a bit more of a pace setter of the season, I left feeling a bit hungry in a manner of speaking. Perhaps I should have made my own shopping list of broccoli and coconut sugar to fill up on, because I left it feeling like I enjoyed this, but I could have wanted more.
Yeah, this was a perfectly cromulent Amazing Race leg. It had tasks. People did the tasks. None of the tasks were unfair. Nobody got dealt a hand so terrible they couldn't have conceivably gotten out of it. It was There was enough of the old school flavor to it that we're happy with it, but it could have been so much more interesting. I mean, think about, and I hesitate to constantly compare Amazing Race US to its international competitors, but think about how many tasks Amazing Race Canada packs into one leg.
Right.
And we have the opportunity now with, 22 extra minutes, and we're just showing like one additional thing that is arguably not a task. And that seems to me like I want them to do more. I want it to be more interesting, because these tasks themselves, they were classic Amazing Race tasks.
Yep.
This was a classic scoop of vanilla ice cream on a cone, but that's all it was. Like, there were no sprinkles. I need sprinkles.
Well, let's tuck into said ice cream cone that is the Amazing Race 35 leg 2. So we start here with your lovingly lower third showing the departure times of these teams as they are headed to, and I will apologize in advance throughout. Rob picked a great time to duck out this week to let me have to read out all the Thai names of all the temples they're going to.
Mike, do you want me to do it? Because I think I can do it.
I will abdicate to you. You take the roadblock of who can pronounce the Thai temple names the best.
Well, we're going to the suburb of Salaya, and we're going to a temple called Wat Suwanaram, and put a pin in this, because this is going to come back. And
you should literally put a pin in this, because a couple of teams put the pin in the wrong location, and that was a problem for them.
Yeah, maybe not their fault. Arguably not their fault, because turns out there are 2 Wat Suwanarams in the area.
Oh.
This is one of these very classic there are two Foucault's pendulums in Paris.
Oh, I remember that one.
We're
Yeah.
going way old school. So basically, it took me a little bit of finding, but they do. The brothers do mention it, that there are two temples with the very same name on the same canal. So they basically, they're in the middle of Bangkok. They say Wat Suwanoram to the driver. The driver's going to take him to the closest one. And it's lucky that it's actually on the way to the other one.
I like how you said the brothers, and that did not define who.
Which brothers?
Yeah, because it was both pairs of brothers, ironically enough, that were the ones getting lost.
It was John and Greg that pointed out that it was on the same canal.
But that's weird. I didn't even realize, like, correlation and causation, just a pure coincidence that both sets of brothers were the ones to go to the wrong Wat Suwanoram.
And literally the same guy gives them directions both times.
So, Jess, we get into our roadblock here. Who has a green thumb? And again, classic Amazing Race roadblock, to your point, even in the realm of, like, floral arrangements. And look, I'm always happy when we go full bloom, though they didn't go full bloom this time. That was the point, right? They should not be in full bloom, which is something I wish I could say at this point in my life. But you have to create essentially 2 arrangements of 10 lotus bulbs each. And Jess, I mean, so much has been said about Mike White's legacy on Survivor, but us OG Amazing Race fans remember he was an amazing racer first, a 2-timer at that. And so I am thrilled. That's why I'm dressed up this week like I'm going to the new HBO spinoff, The Green Lotus, the not full in bloom Lotus.
Well, I gotta say, Mike, I'm a fan of this look.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, look at this. We have a Lotus cameo being made. I'm sure, once again, it is coincidental, but, like, pretty fun, I think. And then just made my mind spin off as to, like, all the different types of characters that would be on The Amazing Race, like the jilted lovers, Tanya McQuad and whoever she ends up stringing along, Armand and his boy toy. It'll be a great time.
Well, now I think season 3 of White Lotus should be a scavenger hunt reality show. And then instead of getting eliminated, they die.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, now we're bringing in, like, another Asian reality scripted
This is
show.
like Squid Game meets White Lotus meets Amazing Race.
There we go. Just sort of triangulate everything. Well, White Lotus season 3 has been announced to be filming in Japan, and so it's like, just, like, scoosh a little bit over and just take place in Thailand. You know, Mike White, you got your start on The Amazing Race. You cut those veneers on this with your dad. Justice for Mel White. Let's make sure that this is acknowledged in this season.
Man, I miss Mel White. I love that guy. He was great.
Well, did you love this roadblock, Jess? Any particular thoughts you had? Because, again, pretty typical Amazing Race thing. Here's a finished display. Learn how to do it in a very particular style. I guess the big to-do was, like, the cranberry bog-esque waders they had to wear as they were putting themselves in the muck.
Yeah, it was kind of fun to talk to Elizabeth and Ileana earlier about this experience, because Elizabeth did have a lot of thoughts on why this task was hard in ways that I think the show didn't do a great job of elucidating.
Interesting.
Like, it looked to me like they really spent more time on the actual arranging of it, but she said that they gave them those plastic pants to wear over their regular pants to go into the water, and she said they did absolutely nothing. So you were soaked to the skin, and it was like wading through quicksandy muck with spiky vines trying to grab you by the leg the whole time, and it was a little bit scary at first to do this, and I think everybody did a pretty good job of hiding if they were uncomfortable by this. Like, people were losing their little water shoes that they were provided, but they were mostly, the part of it that seemed harder was just the, after you gathered your lotuses, the whole, like, detail oriented bit of it. And honestly, as a task, Mike, I don't hate this. This was a great showcase of something that people really do in Thailand. It called upon local culture. It was someplace that you would never go if you were just going on vacation there. And it was an opportunity to, mingle with some locals and
to try to offer them fist bumps and get denied.
You learn about the cultural differences in that they do not fist bump. But it wasn't exciting. It wasn't something like, I think the best Amazing Race tasks are the ones where you would never go there on vacation, but you wish you could go there on vacation. And the Lotus Field was nice, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to. I it's not something I feel like I could go to Thailand and not have that experience and feel like I still experienced Thailand.
I think the appeal, and maybe this is in line with the detour from last week, comes from the Schadenfreude aspect, in my opinion. Like you talk about making it more exciting. I think show the pond more. I
Mm-hmm.
want to see more people lose shoes. You know, if we're talking about the Lotus, like I want to see someone faceplant into the water and have their body just floating there mysteriously for weeks on end. I think that's like the fun of it, is like people being very uncomfortable and out of their element. But it seemed like, to your point, where they got, ironically enough, bogged down was in the creation of it. I think it took Robin, what, 16 tries? I think that might be the most, but for a lot of other people, it took like double digits, dozens of times to do it, because it was very intricate. It was not only the right amount of bulbs, they had to be like of the right age, I suppose. A bit of an ageist bulbing society within this Thai community. Plus, it had to have the particular wrapping of the leaf, the bamboo ties, like so much had to be in there. What did you make, Jess? Because we always call this out because it really varies from task to task. When someone is denied, the judge told them what they had to fix. Do you like that, or do you prefer for them to be left in the dark and for them to spiral trying to figure out what they did wrong?
It depends on the task. In this instance, I think it's fair to be told what you're doing wrong. And I think they are given. I would also be curious to know what kind of criteria they were given on this. Like, what did it say they had to do? And there's so much of that. Like, I think it's really frustrating. I find it frustrating by proxy when it's just like, watch the demonstration and do it exactly like that. And then it's like, you think you're doing it exactly like that. I don't mind them being thrown a bone when it's something really, really deeply intricate like this.
Oh,
And
especially because, again, it took teams up to
yeah,
16 tries to get it right.
yeah, if it was a matter, if this was something simple that they could correct easily, it wouldn't have taken anybody more than 4 tries. But people were still getting the same things wrong over and over. And so I don't think they were really explicit in what they were doing wrong. They just sort of pointed out like something's wrong with like the number here, and something's wrong with the size here. My question to you, Mike, do you think they were allowed, and would this be advantageous while you're out there in the field gathering the lotuses? You need 20 so you can make your 2 bouquets, right?
Yes.
Would it be advantageous while you're out there to just grab 40 just in case?
Yeah, so this is the classic Michael Bruner Peridium OTEV strategy from Big Brother, which is like
Yes.
hoard them all in one area, and then if you need to get more, just keep going back to it. I feel like it's an interesting idea, and we also saw the fact that, again, timing worked out, and I understand another reason why the consistency happened is, I believe it's Ian who did the roadblock for Joe, and Ian points out that the people who came first took all the lotuses that were closest to the area. And so the later you got there, the more you had to go further out and put yourself even more behind by probably wading through all the muck to get there. And I don't know if producers purposely meant for that to happen, but I think that was an interesting sort of externality from just the order of operations.
Well, I mean, that's game theory. That's like needle in a haystack stuff too. That's like the later you get there, the fewer chances you have to find it. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's probably totally intended. I think it's interesting that we have 2 tasks kind of like that because the pomolos are kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
Where, but I think there were so many there that it ultimately ended up not mattering. But I think here it's like, I feel like if I'm coming in the middle of the pack and I'm getting there are teams already there. I might try to find out before I get out there, how many times have you tried this? Like, what try are you on? Is this hard? If somebody's like sobbing, oh, I've been out here, this is my 8th try, I don't really understand what I'm doing. While I'm out there, I'm going to grab a couple extras. And, if I have ones left over, I can either like pitch them back into the bog
Mm-hmm.
or I could use them as capital.
Yeah, just
Like,
roll them around. Those are your that's your shot in the dark. Those are your fire tokens. Just
totally.
hey, you know what? I'll give you my extra set. I'll throw you a bouquet. You're the next win. You're the next person to pass the task.
Yeah.
Congratulations if you give me the express pass.
Yeah, you don't even have to have the bouquet. It's just like, here's 5 more lotuses that you don't have to gather.
Mm-hmm.
Just give you the express pass. Or even, this is, the team you don't like is struggling with this task, and a team that you are lukewarm on is closer to passing but needs to go get more lotuses, give them your surplus and hope that they pass the team you don't like.
Yeah.
I hate the helping teams like for the sake of like we like them and we're friends, but this is a strategic angle you could use as long as production doesn't slap your hand about it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Maybe it's because there's a limited quantity. They didn't necessarily want hoarding, because that's the thing with the. That's the other shit. We'll get into it with the Pomelos. Like, could it have gotten to an aspect that we've seen before in the Amazing Race, where it's like, this side is closed. We ran out of Pomelos, or are they
Yeah.
just after they get the 5 baskets? Are they just throwing them right back into the canal?
I'm sure they're throwing them right back into the canal. When we get to the Pomelos, I'm gonna reveal how like truly, I have a college degree and this pomelo thing was kind of beyond me. But yeah, so back to the lotuses. I don't know where they draw the line on that. There's got to be rules around it. Like, could you? Because I feel like I might not grab all 10 of the perfect lotus on my first try. Could I bring back 11?
Mm-hmm.
And if one of them's not good, I don't have to use that one. Is that allowed? Or does it have to always be exactly that amount that you need every time?
I feel like we have definitely seen. I'm thinking specifically in season 33 because it's recent, where they had to roll the grape leaves, and I very
Mm-hmm.
specifically remember like people making more than the batch that
Yes.
was requested, because it's like, okay, if these don't pass, then maybe these will.
Right. Right. That's probably where I'm getting this from. And this is a little bit different because you only have to make, quote unquote, make 2 things.
Yeah.
But could you get more materials than you need? I That's how I would play it, but the fact that nobody did, I wonder if they're not allowed.
Well, the teams will get to dry off as they end up heading out of the bog, though some
Honestly,
of them
Mike, nobody dries off in Thailand.
are true.
They're wet as wet as you get in Thailand. That's how wet you're going to be for the rest of the day.
And also, a bunch of them are about to get wet very, very soon anyway, so it's like a momentary respite from the water as we go to What's Right King, and we ask, who put a nickel in this elephant? And the answer is the remaining 12 teams, as they have to circle underneath it. Jess, how much were you thinking of poor Meredith back in season 7 of The Amazing Race?
Oh, the elephants.
We've got a bad elephant.
Yep. Well, for starters, Mike, I don't know that I think it is charitable to call this a task. I think the definition of a task is something that if you do it incorrectly, like is there a way to do this task incorrectly in a way that hinders your race? And it kind of seemed to me like there was a little fake out when Jocelyn and Victor got there and they tried to go around it and not underneath it. But there was really no way you could screw this up. That being said, I wanted a whole task in this place because this place looked awesome.
Yeah.
Like there was an elephant that you had to put money in. What were these other animals? Could you put money in them? What did they do when you put money in them? Could we have had a whole like scavenger hunt task around these animals?
Yeah, I want these sort of like assigned task affiliated with each animal for good luck. What's interesting though is that we see this happen with Elizabeth and Ileana a bit, that puts them again a smidge behind in Every Minute is Key in The Amazing Race, that I saw multiple elephants. So this could have been a case of what we saw in Amazing Race 16 so famously, right? Of painting the wrong house. Could we have seen somebody try to put money in the wrong elephant, do the ring around the rosy, and be like, where's my clue? What do I do now?
Yeah, we could have seen that. We could have seen also like people totally not registering that it's a fake elephant and looking for the real one, which I think we did get a
Yes.
bit of. But this elephant was also like, this is the largest race flag I've ever seen. It really does not get more glaringly Amazing Race symbol. Like it's so big, it's almost like too big to register as an Amazing Race symbol.
Yeah, but I will
Um,
also say the clearance to the ground was surprisingly small, given the size of said pachyderm. Like people had to crawl on their hands and knees underneath. I would imagine it's more of like a fluid motion, much like the fluids they immerse themselves in over the course of this leg. But like people had to legitimately crouch and kind of shuffle their way underneath. So I guess the good luck is to like, I don't know, all their knee doctors for hopefully not getting arthritis from having to crawl under this elephant so many times.
Yeah, but there are apparently quite a few things you can do around this temple.
Okay.
They could have made a whole task around this. Like there is a natural fish sanctuary at this temple. with hundreds of thousands of iridescent shark, which sounds amazing.
Oh, Todd would love to feed them.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, can we talk about that? Can we back up and talk about the feeding the catfish? Because
Yeah, sure.
this is a thing that I have not seen in many, many seasons of Amazing Race, and never to this degree. But we often cut to the team members who are not performing the roadblock, and almost always they are just sitting there and they're bored to tears, and they're cranky and they're stressed out because their loved one's not coming back, and they never really talk to each other. And there's never much to do. I think I want to say it was season 12 where we saw like Ron sharing snacks with the other racers. But we never see them what they do while they're waiting for their loved ones to finish the task. And I personally, I love the idea that we're going to give them something completely unrelated to tackle while they're waiting for the roadblock to be done. Something interesting that has no bearing on the race, that just keeps them amused and happy. And it gives them an opportunity to have a little bit of downtime in this cool place that they're visiting and get to experience something of it, where, if you're running by it as fast as you can and just doing tasks that a bunch of American producers have put in front of your face, are you really experiencing that country?
Yeah.
But I think the getting to feed the catfish, and that's something you're not going to get to do a lot of places. Although, we had a team a couple seasons back who probably would have done great at this.
Yeah, I mean, that's very true, actually. Just, like, stick your whole hand in there to feed the catfish. Yeah, this is your eat, sleep, and mingle that you wanted.
Yeah,
Wait for your partner to finish a roadblock for 12 hours.
You don't need to eat, you don't need to sleep, but I do appreciate when you can mingle. And we used to get a lot of this, like, they'd be sitting at the airport and kind of talking to each other. And
I remember the clowns from season 4, like, juggling and doing acts to entertain people.
Yeah, or even those seasons, that first scene of every season where they first land at LAX and they're getting ready to get their ticket to somewhere else, and they're all standing in a circle, like introducing each other and shaking hands and getting to know each other. Like, that's heartwarming. And I like to see how these teams relate to each other, especially when it's not contentious yet. When it's just kind of like they're on an adventure, they're having a good time. I don't think that detracts too much. And the fact that we get these 90-minute episodes, this is our chance to see that.
Well, we fed the catfish, but now it is time to talk a lot about food, Jess, as we get to our detour of the episode. Stock up or scoop up? So obviously a lot was to be said about last week and the unbalanced aspect of the detour. I know you were a proponent for it. What'd you think about the balance this week between the two tasks?
Well, these are two pretty standard Amazing Race tasks. Like, weren't we even literally last week making fun of the shopping list at the market task? Because it is a staple of every season. And in fact, Elizabeth and Ileana even called that out. They're like, we've seen this task so many times, we knew we didn't want to do it on that account. And it's like, okay, I get it. This is a fun way to see some of the area and to showcase what a typical market looks like, but we do it every season and it's not appreciably different every time. I will say the food looked better than it usually does.
Like, I would the broccoli look.
It looked like broccoli. It was like I would eat all of that stuff. It all looked amazing. But it was not. There was nothing new to that task, and it really. And the pomelos were fun.
Yeah,
but it was also like, it's a choice between, like, here's something that's a little bit intellectually taxing versus something that's going to take you a finite amount of time to move all these heavy things from one place to the other. And it's kind of a no-brainer. Like, I would have taken the pomelos all day, every day.
Yeah, because I think that, like, even if you have this idea in your head, like Greg and John did momentarily, of like, oh, it's going to be first come, first serve, there might be out of pomelos by the time that we get there, like, there still is, I feel like, a fixed amount of time that you can work with, that it will get done, as opposed to the shopping, which I think is a much more variable. I always enjoy the shopping tasks. I do agree that they've become a bit repetitive at this point, but, like, in this leg in particular, where I feel like our racers didn't really interact with the culture, with the people, with the exception of that, denied fist bump. This felt nice for them to, wander around as the dumb Americans being like, how do you pronounce this? Broccoli? Okay. Like, that was fun enough to me. And it was one of the only ones that like actually caused a bit of a shakeup in the rankings when Andrea and Milena were able to pass Elizabeth and Ileana because of the Durian mistake.
Yeah. Not to mention Victor and Jocelyn hold on to their first place lead because this is like the ultimate potential 5-hole for them.
I was going to say, like, is this a backdoor 5-hole? That sounds dirty.
No.
That feels fully bloomed.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a backdoor 5-hole, Mike. I don't care what they told you in 8th grade. No, this is more along the lines of, this is what, here is a task that one team is going to be absurdly good at. Like, it's a 5-hole setup, so if you screwed it up, you could humiliate yourself on a huge level.
Yeah.
But it is along the lines of putting a hockey task in the middle of a leg when 2 of your racers are Olympic hockey players. So it is really one of those situations where they don't expect them to do badly at it, but it feels a little unfairly stacked in the favor of somebody that speaks the local language and runs a grocery store.
Yeah, this was really, and we'll obviously break it down team by team in a little bit, but this was like made for Jocelyn and Victor in basically every way, to the point where Jocelyn even lampshades it, right? She's like, Victor, use those dolly skills, and is basically saying this would be very embarrassing if us, the grocery store owners, would fail at a grocery shopping task on The Amazing Race.
Yeah, and I want to come back around to this because I do have a few points to make about Victor and Jocelyn when we start to talk about individual team performances, but I thought it was fun that the actual Thai word for broccoli is broccoli.
Yeah,
because
I love that. I always love that when it comes to languages, that there are just some words that carry over. Sometimes it's through more like modern circumstances where like there just isn't a word for, in other dictionaries.
Yeah.
Here it's just, nope, broccoli has stood the test of time. It is the Rosetta Stone. It's the Tower of Babel.
Well, I think it is probably the same it's the modern edition of a particular cultivar. And like they didn't have it, so I mean, I could be getting this totally backward, but I think it's like this is something that's a relatively late addition to the Thai language, and so they just use the phonetic, transliteration. But yeah, in Japan, like the word for computer is computer, and the best is the word for a temporary job comes from the German word for job. Like we're used to seeing like English transliterations, but that's, linguistic sidebar here. But it was very funny to see people realize, oh, it's broccoli is broccoli.
Yeah.
And and also that fried pork leg looked amazing. And
the food looked really good. Like I would wander around this market if I didn't have to get to see Phil on the mat. Moving over to Scoop It, what I did find actually really interesting was I didn't even think about this until we saw Steve and Anna Lee sync. The idea of like almost a risk versus reward thing where you did have to fill a certain number, and this was a way to, I think, perhaps handicap those big brawnier teams. And not to say that Steve and Anna Lee necessarily were that, but like, we're just going to take out as many pomelos as we can, oops all pomelos, and then just toss them into the buckets and then, drag them across the line. No, if you loaded up too many, your boat sinks and your game sinks. And so I think that was an interesting aspect of it. It seemed like the vast majority of the teams that did it didn't have that problem, but I did like that it required multiple trips at least.
Yeah, and I thought this was going to be a bigger story than it was until we see Robin and Chelsea come around with like they're basically up to their necks in pomelos.
Yeah, Mogo paddling the boat.
Yeah, I was like, how did they even do that when other people were thinking like, we're taking on too much water here? But I thought this was interesting because my first thought, and I'm not a smart woman, was I thought those grew on trees. And then I realized, oh, that's how they store them. Because if you don't have a giant refrigerated, container that you can put all your fruit in, you can put it in the water and it stays nicer longer. In fact, you can do that with produce in your fridge. If you put your citrus fruit in water in the fridge, it'll stay nice for much longer than if you don't.
Jess, you're a woman of the world. Have you had pomelo before?
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's like a big grapefruit.
Up until now, I thought pomelo was the name of one of LeVar Ball's children. I did not realize it was a thing, though apparently the largest citrus fruit in the world, right? According to Phil.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're good if you like grapefruit, which I very much do. Have you ever had a tangelo?
Yes.
A tangelo is a crossbreed between a Tangerine and Pomelo, which is wild to think about because you think about it in terms of like that's kind of like a cross between a Great Dane and a Chihuahua.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's the flight time and Big Easy of fruit pairings.
Yeah, it really is. But yeah, the Tangelo is kind of like they breed a lot of the sweetness out of the tangerine by putting that like tart pomelo into it. And I didn't realize that either, but that makes a lot of sense to me. But yeah, these are fun. They're fun because they're like the size of basketballs, and it was fun on that account. And it's also, I I think it was pretty, like, it was a pretty task. It was visually very interesting. You got to get a little bit of exercise. You had to kind of learn how to maneuver these boats around. Um, and it was definitely a local culture kind of thing that you're not going to get like just watching the Travel Channel. So I didn't hate it, but there was no wow factor with either one of these tasks, to be honest.
I'm always intrigued when you're a team on The Amazing Race. Food is always scant to come by. Nobody wants to stop and get food. They usually rely on the Cliff Bars, or if you're The Amazing Race Canada, luckily you're steadily supplied. You think they could have just, like, snatched a pomelo or two, brought it with them in the tuk-tuk?
I think they probably could have, but it was season 25 as the professional wrestlers where Robbie used to do that at every stop. And he'd just be like, okay, I've done the market task. I'm going to take this apple. And he'd just walk off with it. I think I 100% would have done that, but they're hard to open. You can't just like peel them like you would an orange. You kind of probably need a knife to get through that thick peel.
Oh, they should have put a clue in one of them and then add a needle in a haystack on top of that of like, here's your 5 baskets of pomelos. Now find the one with your clue.
Oh, but that's wasting so much food, Mike.
That's very true, actually, yeah.
I mean, we were told by Phil that when we thought they were wasting apples on Tough as Nails, that they were really like, these are special apples.
These are the most deformed pomelos in Thailand.
But I don't know if it was the same case for these pomelos. They all looked pretty good to me.
All right, well, let's start getting into our teams. Let's break down each of the remaining teams' course over this course of The Amazing Race. We're going to bring up the graphics as well for those of you that are watching on YouTube because, again, we know it's early, and so it's always good to put the faces to the names. I actually want to start from the bottom and go to the top again because, Jess, your interview with the most recently eliminated team will be on and attached to this podcast. So after we finish and you see 15 minutes left, don't leave. That's going to be Jess's interview with the eliminated team from this week, Elizabeth and Ileana. Again, speaking towards consistency, Jess, they finished 12th 2 times in a row.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of consistency this leg. But I thought what was really wild about the consistency this leg was that you had Elizabeth and Ileana really get tripped up on both legs by the detour.
Yes.
And by not getting to do the detour exactly how and when they wanted. And it was just rotten luck in their case. I think if either one of those things had gone differently for them, they'd probably still be in it.
And this shows like why you might want to have a hard and fast strategy on The Amazing Race, but oftentimes it gets thrown out the window. Again, look at the exact same decision. We're here, we'll stick with the detour. 2 different outcomes. Same placement, but 2 different outcomes. Arguably, their race gets saved last week because they stay at the detour. Their race ends, arguably, here when they decide to stay at the market because then they end up losing the durian, and that's the thing ultimately to send them home. It's tough, Jess. I mean, literally, from the first step, they got lost going to the very first roadblock at the Belmont, or the Bilford. It's wild to see that they were basically bit in the back over the course of the entire race for them. And granted, it's only 2 legs, but I just think the way things were stratified, it felt like they never had a chance to catch up.
This sort of parallels really interestingly with what we saw in Survivor these last 2 episodes. Like where we had a contestant who, like, they're so excited to be there, they love the show so much, and then right out of the gate it goes badly and they just never quite get on the right foot after that. I think that's
definitely... and I do believe they did have to climb a ladder to get up to the roof, right?
Yeah, well, there was relatively fewer ladders here, but I think same principle, because when you talked to them, I'm sure you clocked, they are huge fans of the show and they have seen every season. They knew every task. So when they saw this shopping task, they're like, I've seen this 100 times, don't want it. But the cab driver clearly was friends with Andrea and Melena's cab driver and just figured, well, there's a bunch of gringos that are trying to go someplace for a TV show. It's clearly the same TV show. They must want to go to the same place, so he dropped them there. And that was interesting. We've seen that happen before on this show a number of times, but I don't think they could have gained anything by switching at that point, because it's possible that their driver didn't know where the other one was. And, they really don't have, it's a sunk cost it's the sunk cost thing. I don't think it's
like the boat
here. Yeah, it's like the boat.
You stick with what you've got, and you deal with it. And again, they were doing okay. Had they not forgotten the durian, and look, people like to forget about durian because it's a very stinky fruit.
I wanted somebody to drop a durian.
I know, and just like clear out the entire marketplace.
Yes.
So yeah, unfortunately, Elizabeth and Ileana, it's tough, I think, due to both navigational difficulties on their part and others. I know when I did my exit interview with them, which is up at Parade, they talked a lot about how the reason they fell behind so much in the first leg was because like their tuk-tuk driver took them to the back of where they were supposed to go. And so they spent 20 minutes running around to find that. And so it really was just like a confluence of factors that led to them occupying this position. And then due to just the absolute, linear, I should say, aspect that this course took, they kind of had to remain in this position. And it was just a matter of like, you gotta be 2 or 3 teams at this point, and a couple of key mistakes put them behind here. So sad to see Elizabeth and Ileana go. I definitely recommend check out the interviews. Again, the one with Jess is attached to this podcast, because I do think, not to say they didn't leap off the screen when they were on the screen, especially like their response to being told they had survived elimination last week, but got a lot more of their personalities in the interviews, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I was telling you before we started recording, like, Amazing Race does not tend to cast introverts, but I love the chance to talk to all of them, because I really do get a sense of like how and why they were cast. And I would have liked to see more of this team in particular, not just because they had many kind things to say about our podcast.
Well, let's move up the order here to the team that eliminated Elizabeth and Ileana. Not a great day for Robin and Chelsea. Much like, I suppose, their own friendship, things got off to a rocky start in the Amazing Race for this team. What did you think of their origin story, Jess?
That is wild. That is wild on a number of levels. But I think it's admirable that that Chelsea was able to win over a hater. We have mad respect for that. And
it sounds like the plot of like a Disney Channel original movie. Like,
yeah, it really.
Oh, we're forced to be on a soccer team together. We'll never get along.
I swear this actually happens in Disney Descendants. So yeah, they are forced to spend time with each other, and despite their differences, they forge a friendship that lasts the test of time. And I thought that was fun. I love when people in the show have been friends forever. Like, it's different from like, oh yeah, we met at work 2 years ago. We both work at the meat packing plant, or we both work at the data processing facility. It's kind of boring. This is fun. Like, they did sports together as teenagers, and they're still a huge part of each other's lives. I think that's really a lot of fun. And I was especially impressed. Like we mentioned it before, I was especially impressed with what they did on the Pomelo task.
Yeah.
Like, just filling their boat up to the point where it had to be dragging along the bottom of that canal. That was really impressive compared to when everybody else, like, it was a little reckless, honestly, but it paid off for them. They got done like seconds before, they would have been eliminated.
Right, exactly. From what Elizabeth and Ileana told me, like, apparently the producers told them that, like, it was close. They didn't give a number of minutes. I don't think it was, like, a foot race or anything. Obviously, we didn't see them in the same frame at the same time, because what ended up putting them in this position, again, it wasn't a far fall for the two of them. They did finish, I mean, not even a fall at all. They finished in 11th last time, but it was really Robin, unfortunately, who had a really difficult time with the Lotuses. Again, took her 16 tries to do so, which is probably the age that the two of them ended up being. I will also say, like, I could see the appeal, because for Robin, Chelsea will tell you the truth no matter what, considering that she called you on the phone and like berated the shit out of you. Or I should say, for Chelsea's sake. Yeah, like that's a wild thing. So it's like, okay, listen, better my friend than my enemy. At that point, like, I'm going to use your weapons for good.
I mean, it's important to have someone in your life who's always going to tell you the truth.
Yes, exactly. Like you sucked on those lotuses.
Yep. Yep. And you know, I it worries me that they've had this much trouble this early on. Like
Yeah.
I don't think I would put them on my winner contention list, but you know, next week everything's getting shaken up and we could see them get some tasks that really push them out in front, and we could be talking about an entirely different race next time because like clearly they're physical beasts
Yes.
and they're having fun. They know each other extremely well. I think we could see them have a redemption arc, but yeah, I don't know so far. Like it's hard to say that about a team that finishes in 11th place twice.
Yeah, it's tough, but again, we have to think of this more as like a mega leg with a pit stop in the middle, if that makes sense. We're like, we saw this last time where the Ducati tasks definitely changed things up, but there weren't a lot of tasks this leg to cause major shakeups in everything.
Yeah,
Pretty
it
much,
was still like we have to calibrate the back half of the pack.
we just need to point out there were 12 teams in this leg. 3 of them, 1/4, changed places. 3/4 of the rest of these teams did not whatsoever. The first 6 teams and the last 4 teams did not change places at all.
That's not a good thing. That's like shades of season 24, Mike.
All right, well, let's move on to happier prospects here. These balls of sunshines, Andrea and Milena. We found out this episode, Jess, Andrea is the godmother to Milena's son.
Yeah, yeah, and you get a kind of a sweet moment where Milena says so long as she's been away from him, and I love that the two of them, like again, it's one of those situations where they're, you know, found family and their bond is really clear and their enthusiasm for everything they do. Like I love that Milena is just at an 11 all the time.
Yeah, though I did feel like we got a lot less of them than we did in the premiere episode. For whatever reason, maybe it was just like the exuberance at the task or what have you. Maybe Milena had to like settle down and buckle down and weave the lotuses because she knew that she was at the bottom. I just feel like we got a bit of a different energy from them this episode.
Yeah, I think they didn't really have a story the way
Yeah.
they did last week, and there wasn't really much to report about them. Like that's the thing. There's not going to be a lot to report about most of these teams, Mike, because they did the tasks in about the same amount of time as each other because they were all finishing in the same order as they started. And Andrew and Milena didn't really like they didn't make up any time. They didn't lose a ton of time. It's just they just did the tasks and there's not a whole lot of there. I think we're going to see more of them next week, but
Yeah.
I think we're going to be flipping through a lot of these teams pretty fast. Like, oh, well, they said a funny thing, or they seemed to have trouble on this. They took 8 tries on this one, but I don't know what else to say. You know, there's too many teams left to really have a deep dive into their Amazing Race philosophy.
Well, we can at least speak a little bit about something interesting that happened with this next team. One of only 3 teams, again, to change places. Let's talk about Joel and Garrett here because, Jess, they committed one of the ultimate Amazing Race faux pas, albeit momentarily. They did go back almost immediately to get it, but they left behind the fanny pack.
Womp womp. And the way that they revealed that they had forgotten the fanny pack was very funny.
Yeah.
When Joel says, I don't have the fanny pack, and Garrett's like, well, you're supposed to be wearing it. He's like, yeah, but I'm not wearing it.
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Yeah, and the fact that they had to tell their driver to turn around about 10 times as well, like that had to be very stressful and frustrating. And I think in moments like that, you have to be thinking, oh, I'm out of it. I'm done. And I'm going to be the person that forever forgot their fanny pack. You know, we can name every team that lost something important like that. Like your passports are in there. We know the teams that lost their passports because it becomes a whole thing.
You're
and
done.
It eliminates them.
You're
done. So they were very lucky that they realized it early enough that they could just go back and get their stuff and that it was unmolested and they could continue on. They also had a fun moment when Garrett is saying he's going to take the roadblock and Joel grabs his hand and looks at it. He's like, yep, you have a green thumb. It's such a dad joke, but it's so
yeah, these guys are definitely team dad joke, I would say. Like they sort of represent as well, as I mentioned before, the sort of catfish out of water, if you will, mentality of like, even though I think it's Rob who gets the quote of like, you don't see this at home, they very, very much evoke that idea. Garrett also seemed to be the most wet by the end of all this, because I believe, wasn't he the one that like tripped and fell into the boat during the Pomelos?
Yes, he he took a little dive there.
If Joel gets wet, does he like sink to the bottom because his beard is just so dense?
Yeah, I would not want to. I would not want to get any like lotus bog muck in that beard. That could spell trouble for him. Yeah, it was very funny. Like it also seems to me like this is one of those teams we always talk about how when you have a team of two people like this that come from very similar backgrounds that are kind of similar on paper, one of them ends up kind of being the star of the team and the other one is a little bit more reserved. And
The
with
Gary.
Andrea,
You could
yeah,
say Gary.
I can say Gary. Yeah, I would think Garrett is the Gary of this group.
What is it about GAR names? I'm not entirely sure.
I don't know, but arguably I would even say like I think Andrea might be the Gary of her team there. But it's interesting because it plays out differently where it is frequently like she's frequently lampshading it like, yeah, I'm the more reserved one and Milena is the wacky one. But in this case, it's like it's kind of organically that's what's happening here. Like we're getting so much more of Joel than Garrett. I feel like I know him a little bit better.
Well, if you can tell that the killer fatigue has already set in for me, this being the day after a live know-it-alls, my math was all wrong because I realized in looking at the middle of the pack, no, only 2 teams swapped positions, not 3/4. 5/6 of the teams did not change position because these next 2, Liam and Jeremy, remain square in the middle in 8th place. And yeah, there's nothing really happening with these guys. They seem like very pleasant gentlemen, but they are by far the most purple people in this cast, right?
Yeah, they're nice. They're extremely attractive. Oh, by the way, good fractioning, Mike.
That's right.
Very proud of you. Your math is top notch today. Yeah, there's not enough of them yet. Like I honestly the feeling I get from them is like they're a team that's going to get eliminated somewhere in the middle of the season. Like they're going to stick around for a few more weeks, but this is like they got like 7th, 6th, 5th place upside at best.
I don't know. I mean, not to spoil the last season of Amazing Race Canada, but I think when you look at a pair of brothers who were like not the biggest personalities, who were just in the middle for the first little bit, and then eventually they, I wouldn't say surged, but certainly hit a point where they were able to make it to the end. Like, I think these guys have what it takes. I just think it was a matter of, they got put on the second flight due to navigational difficulties that only put them at such a placement position at the end of the first leg. And then they continued along the linearity of the second leg to get to where they are. They were also, again, the other set of brothers that got sent to the wrong temple. So, like, I still see potential with them. And hopefully, because I just want to see more of them at this point. We've seen 180 minutes so far of the Amazing Race 35. We should be able to know at least a little bit out of everybody here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we know that their parents split up and they had they weren't close as a result, and they're getting to know each other again. They're only a year apart, so that's a closer spread than most sibling teams. But yeah, there's not a whole lot else to say about them. They're doing okay, but not great. I think they also like this happens in Amazing Race Canada a lot more often, where there's a team of 2 guys that are inexplicably like still in the race every week, but you keep like listing off all the teams and that's the one you can't name.
Yep.
And somehow that team makes it to the final 3, but is in distant 3rd place the entire time. So maybe that's the arc we see for Liam and Jeremy.
The Lolo effect.
Yes, the Lolo effect. Yeah, or I call it the well, now I can't even remember the name of the guys. Their wrestling team from Amazing Race Canada 3 is like the
Oh, yeah. Matt and
Nick. Matt and Nick. Yeah. That was like the ultimate example of that because it's like, I don't know anything about these guys. They're still here. Why are they still here? They're not going to win. So that's my early feel for this team. It's either these guys or the next ones we're going to talk about.
Well, let's talk about, again, the only other team besides Joel and Garrett to swap places in this episode. Joe and Ian, looking up right now, went from 9th to 7th. Obviously, they had some stuff happen last leg that put them behind. Here, they're able to make up a considerable amount of time. Like Andrea and Milena, I felt like they had such big personalities in the premiere, but I think to your point, Jess, like, they didn't struggle really in anything, and it didn't seem like at least they were bickering to us. So like there really was nothing doing with this guys this episode.
Yeah, yeah, they were fine. I think on paper this seems like a team that should be doing a lot better than it has so far, but I think it is almost entirely down to them not making that first flight. Like we would see them in front if the first flight, if they hadn't gotten lost on the way to the airport.
Yeah, I mean literally they finished everything first.
Yeah. Yeah, they're really good at the tasks. I think if there's a little more self-navigation, I'm going to be worried about them, but
Right.
it's all going to depend on what exactly goes on in the next leg.
Yeah, and I think that they arrived first in the first task, so like navigation even worked well for them there. It was just like getting to LAX that proved to be the problem, as it is for so many commuters. Let's move into our top 6. Again, unchanged, but we can talk about if our opinions on them have changed at all, getting to see 90 more minutes of them. Steve and Annalie in 6th place. Anything on Steve and Annalie here, Jess?
I thought Steve doing the roadblock was kind of fun because it was a task that I think like much has been made of him being a guy's guy and then him having to do a flower arranging task and get good at it and be kind of humbled by it. I thought that was kind of a fun arc for him. He's, they're fun. I like their bond. I think they're doing okay. I don't see them popping out in front anytime soon, but we'll see. It depends on, again, like all of these teams, how they do next week depends a lot on how much they have an opportunity for the order to shake up.
Something I thought was interesting about the two of them was I'm sure their why for being in the Amazing Race is not like primarily this, but Annalie revealing like I want to start a family soon, and this is like almost the last thing I get to do for me, or like I want to take this trip with my dad, so let's do it. I feel like this season we've gotten a lot of like why people wanted to do the Amazing Race. We hear this with Elizabeth and Ileana in this episode that they have been two ships literally passing in the night when it came to traveling together. And so I do find it interesting to find at least a version of their why here as sort of like one last rodeo. Maybe I'm saying that just by looking at Steve's hat of like a father-daughter trip. Now, I would say if you're looking for that, maybe just book a trip and don't go on to like a high-stakes $1 million reality show, but you do you, boo-boo.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I did. Like the year before I had my son, I went to Iceland with my cousin for 2 weeks and we had an amazing time. I highly recommend that. Like take a trip with somebody that you need to reconnect with before you embark on the adventure of parenthood. It's an absolutely great idea. I don't think you need to do it for television, but I think that also raises how many of these people are diehard Amazing Race fans. I from this entire cast, I get this real feeling of love for this specific thing. They're not looking for an adventure; they want this adventure, and
I mean,
yeah.
Look no further than the fact that like this was the first season in a while, right? With like no celebrities or no famous faces, people that have made major talk shows appearing. Like this truly was regular people. And so I do wonder if it is this sort of again new era Survivor thing of like, well, the people who want to be on the show now are fans of the show first and foremost.
Yeah, I don't think, they weren't really combing the Ellen show for Amazing Race teams this time. They really does seem like these people organically applied and really sought out the show rather than the other way around. So I'm really happy with the cast so far on that front for sure.
All right, let's move in to Todd and Ashley. Continue to make very entertaining television. I guess the big to do here, or to Dodd, that was terrible. Was
no.
Well, that's what Ashley was saying, or the judges were to her various efforts weaving Lotuses. As Ashley seemed to be, I think, the most like visibly struggling. I should say we saw Jocelyn definitely, have some difficulties during a commercial break. Robin broke down as well, but Ashley does get passed by a couple of teams on this task.
Yeah, and she's really struggling at this point, and I really loved how Todd handled this. Like the point where she's coming back from that task, and Todd has had a grand old afternoon playing with the fish. And okay, is he the dog of the season? Is he the Dusty of the season, Mike?
He is like a freaking Irish wolfhound, if that's the case.
Yeah, I was gonna say he's like a golden retriever. because Ashley comes back and she's worried that she's let him down. She's like, we dropped so far in the placement. This is awful. And he's like, yeah, girl, you got it. Good job.
I thought you left forever. I didn't realize you'd come back.
Yeah, this is like dogs greeting their owners when they come back from serving overseas. And he's cheering for her. He's just happy that she's done, and he's happy that they get to keep going. And he's so positive. Like, his positivity, I think it's going to be an asset down the road.
Yeah, I think that I'm going to make a bold assumption and say this will not be the last time that Ashley will come to terms with her own sort of anxiety and emotional stress due to tasks that fall entirely upon her. And I think this is a great case of like people balancing each other out as teammates. And I know that they had their issues beforehand, but it seems like from what I'm getting, that Todd did seem like the accommodating force. And Ashley also gets to be sort of like the more type A person as well to like keep Todd focused. I say, stop feeding the catfish. We have to get somewhere.
She's like the Kim to his Pen.
Yeah.
And we know how that turned out.
$1 million richer. Let's move on to team number 4 this leg. Morgan and Lena didn't need to use that express pass, though. They said something interesting, Jess, that raised my eyebrows a bit, a la Phil. They said they want to use the express pass in leg 3 or 4. Is there a limit that we're not aware of?
It's possible there is. That has been the case before with express passes. They've had an expiration date. It's not usually that soon, but that would be interesting if it was like you could get an express pass, you can only use it for a few days, and then another one enters the mix, and yours is done. That's great. I like that. Like, we've said that with Survivor and Immunity Idols too.
Yeah,
like, and what if they're not ridiculously overpowered that way?
I like that. Again, I know that express passes bring some fun drama into the game, and I feel like that would be a good opportunity. And again, we're projecting, maybe it's just their own sort of like ridiculous goalpost they set for themselves, but it would be interesting if like it's an express pass you can only use for the first third of the race, and then you just like pepper them in throughout once one expires. I like that better than having one team hold on to it the entire time and try to create a storyline around that.
Yeah, not to mention if they use it, maybe the order will shake up a little bit.
Very true. She should have done it just to be like, okay, you know what? I don't want to be 4th place this time, because I feel like the vast majority of teams will be the same place they were last time. Let's be in the minority here.
Yeah, or even going back to like the really early seasons of The Amazing Race, where you'd have these teams that were just focused on, I'm going to win first place this leg. And it wasn't even because they were getting a prize necessarily. It was just because they were obsessed with being first. And because any of that actually mattered.
All right, let's get on to the podium here. We mentioned them before. They couldn't find the right temple, but they did find Phil in the pit stop in 3rd place once again. Greg and John. Greg, very impressive in the roadblock. Had to make up some time and leapfrogged 2 teams in the process.
Yeah, and I love his approach here, where he's listening to what other teams are getting wrong and incorporating it into what he's doing. Yeah. That is highly strategic thinking, and I'm surprised we don't see that more often. That was really smart thing on his part, and it got him out of there much faster.
Yeah, I think it's selective listening, and it's tough when you are so... I'm a type of person, I'm not a big multitasker. Like, when I am focused on a task, I cannot pay attention to anything else around me. Unfortunately, just ask my wife. And so I feel like I could understand, especially if you're someone like Ashley, who is like very overwhelmed by this, that like you are concentrating solely on your work and you're alone. But if you happen to open your ears and take in what these judges are saying, that can certainly help a lot, considering that you were all making the same thing.
Yeah, they were... it was incredibly smart of him. And I think at a certain point, like, the task is not going to get more complicated. You're just like, at a certain point, your hands know what they're doing. So you can kind of turn off and listen to what's going on around you.
All right, let's move on to Rob and Corey back in 2nd place. Not a lot from them either this week, I would say, but still, I know it's tough to say, like, they're good, they're consistent, considering that, again, 10 out of 12 teams finish in the exact same position, but I admire a lot of consistency for particularly the lead players, and I thought Rob did a good job with the roadblock.
Yeah, I thought he did great. I thought the task judge did a pretty good job of, like, indicating to him what he had done wrong without having to say anything verbally.
Yeah.
I'm sure that the interpreter they had would elucidate if needed, but I thought that was that was kind of cool that she figured out how to communicate with him. And yeah, he did a good job. They did a good job on the giant grapefruits, and here they are in second place again. And at least we can say that at least the teams weren't all in the same place at the same time the whole time. Like the
Yeah.
fact that the second place team did one roadblock, the first place team did one detour, the first place team did the other detour, and they still came together in first and second place respectively. I think it just says that they're all very solid and consistent, and the tasks were balanced. I think that's what that says.
I really hope that the interpreter has to like wear the outfits that the racers do. Sometimes, like, I want the interpreter in those bog overalls out there in the muck trying to, like, tell the cameras what Rob is trying to sign to them.
Yeah, so the interpreter also needs to be in the bog.
Yes.
I wondered, like, do the camera people, like, do they just have one, like, designated person with a GoPro out in the bog, or do the cameraman have to actually follow them into the bog?
And that's interesting as well because, I mean, we have seen stuff in the past from, like, cameramen needing to replace film and that costing some teams time. Like, when your camera people have to get changed, I imagine that costs you some time as well.
Yeah, in the digital age, I think a lot of that is a lot less complicated than when they had those 50-pound behemoths on their shoulder and
Yep.
they're running around with like the giant boom mic. I think technology has gotten a lot better in the camera department, so you could be a little bit more nimble, which is why we don't see that as much. And like you can get a camera battery that lasts for 2 solid days, but I always wish that we got to hear a little bit more of that behind the scenes stuff the same way we did back in those early days, because I know so many weird little facts about how they used to do things that are very clearly not how they do them anymore. And this is one of them.
All right, well, let's finish off with the leaders in the doghouse for the second week in a row. It's Jocelyn and Victor, and this is so, like, happily surprising to me. They themselves admit it, right? Not the strongest, not the fastest. I think their combined ages, they are the oldest team on the race, and they are crushing it right now. Like, they're getting the perfect task at the perfect time, but I think also their knowledge and reliability in each other. Jess, I did not realize. So they're celebrating their 20th wedding anniversary, and Garrett also is celebrating his 20th wedding anniversary. Like, is 20 years the Amazing Race anniversary? Should we be aware of this?
Well, it's something we don't have to worry about for a long time, Mike. But
Yeah, I don't know if the Amazing Race will be around at that point.
yeah, who knows? I've been informed by certain people in my household that in 12 years I'm going to be applying for the Amazing Race. So we shall see. But
All
yeah,
right.
Jocelyn and Victor. Another solid week. I guess I really have to question at this point, Mike, what's going to happen when they're out of their element, when they're not getting tasks that speak directly to what they do for a living, and when Victor doesn't speak the language? How is that going to affect how they do as racers?
It's a really good question, and we got a peek of it next week. Now, again, the next time ons are almost never indicative of like what's actually going to happen. And I feel like the sneak peek almost within the sneak peek that we got was how Jocelyn reacted initially to the roadblock in this leg, where like she did have a period where she's like, oh, okay, this isn't good. This isn't good. And again, our rule, commercial break, came back. She was fine. But I do wonder if we should put a pin in that. That much like we talked about with Ashley, this might be sort of like a nagging personal trait that might come up a bit more the more roadblocks she does.
Yeah, we're going to have to see more from them before we can make a judgment call on like, has this been a fluke, or are they really just that good? But they've been so good, these two legs.
Yeah,
I would
yeah,
really I feel like next week, if they went out next week, it would be the biggest fall from grace since Rob and Amber in All Stars.
yeah. So maybe they'll just have to sort through some mail in a post office, and that will be their downfall too.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we don't see that very much. Like
Yeah.
in recent seasons, it's been the teams that finish out in front in the beginning are usually the teams that are still there in the end. You never have a team like come out strong and get a couple of first places and then drop down. Like I think it's been at least 10 seasons since we've seen a team do that.
Yeah, we had like the Seth and Olive in Amazing Race 29, but that involved a U-turn. That was very much
Yes.
purposely done to them. We'd know if there was a U-turn next leg. There appears to not be one. I guess there is a U-turn though in what's happening next, which is apparently a shakeup. The hourglass will be tilted upside down. Jess, up is down, down's up. Cats and dogs getting along. Total madness, as assumingly they're going to have 2 flights to where they're going next, which I believe is Vietnam. Yes, they're going to Vietnam next. And it seems like the first flight is going to get delayed to put the second flight ahead of them. And so, listen, it's unfortunate for those top teams, but it is exciting for us as fans to now see, like, okay, how will these people do in the front? And subsequently, how will these people do in the back?
Yeah, I love this for us. It's a really serendipitous turn of events. When was the last time that airport delays had an effect on the Amazing Race? I think we have to go back to like Chester and Ephraim.
Yeah, I mean, was that delays or was that just like bad booking?
Well, it was the last time that a flight had anything to do with somebody being eliminated, I think. And that was, almost a full decade ago at this point. In travel, the travel logistics themselves have become less and less important, which is why this feels like such a return to form, because it actually is playing a role now. And I'm glad that it's just playing a minor role. It appears like they're going to get in an hour later than they thought. So that's like almost nothing. That's practically an equalizer at this point. So I'm happy to see it, just because it's going to make things more interesting. And I would hate to see this be the reason somebody gets eliminated, but I also don't like it when the Amazing Race is just rewarding people that did well in the previous leg by letting them get further out in front on the next leg.
It's sort of like the Nepo baby thing. You were born into the first flight and you will stay in the first part of the entire group throughout the season.
Yep. Yeah, once you're in the first flight, you are always in the first flight, and that's no good.
It's that silver spoon of coconut sugar in your mouth. Well, Jess, this was a very sweet time getting to break this down, much like a Pomelo proper. We miss Raw, but I'm happy that when you and I are on together, we really get to like geek out, get nitty gritty with the Amazing Race. Of course, again, coming up right after our usual end slate here will be your interview with Elizabeth and Ileana. But is there anything else you want to plug?
Well, I'm still talking about Walking Dead over in Post Show Recaps every week. And we are currently talking about the series Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon. And I talked to so many people last night, Mike, who came up to me and said, I used to love listening to you talking about The Walking Dead, and I don't watch the show anymore. And to those people, I say, come back, because
Go back.
Come back. Come back, Shane. The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon, is some of the best Walking Dead we've had in a really long time. And we are just having a blast covering it. It's 6 episodes long. It's not a huge commitment. And every week we've got thoughts on Daryl Dixon going to France and hanging out with Fleur from the Harry Potter movies. And it's a wild time. There's a zombie orchestra playing Bolero. I'm not even kidding. So check that out over in Post Show Recaps. And of course, you can always tweet at me about any TV you're watching, because I watch a lot of TV. I just don't talk about it on most podcasts. I've promised my family 2 podcasts a week is it. So I'm watching a lot of TV and tweeting about it for as long as we have that wretched site. You can find me over there at Haymaker Hattie, and eventually I'll probably move on to whatever the next thing is, but not there yet.
Yeah, Pomelo Boat is going to be the next new major social media platform of choice. And
That's
of course,
more catchy than Mastodon.
Definitely. And you can follow me at a Mike Bloomtap. As I mentioned before, I also got the chance to talk with Elizabeth and Ileana. You can check that out over on parade.com, as well as my exit press with this week's reality roundup of CBS shows between the eliminated contestants of Survivor, Big Brother, and The Challenge. We started the B&B back up for Survivor, a very fun podcast with Dwight. And actually this weekend, we'll be talking with someone who was on The Amazing Race 35 as the winner of The Amazing Race 34 in Claire Refuse, getting to see her talk some Survivor, which is like her first CBS reality love. I'll be sure to get some tea as well about the time she spent on the roof with Derek X during that initial roadblock. And then post show recaps. Josh and I are back on our BSG BS as we are gearing up for season 2 there. So that's going to do it for this week's coverage of The Amazing Race. Listen, it was an enjoyable time. Not a lot of variance happening, but could be a worse way to spend 90 minutes. And I'm very eagerly anticipating the flight shakeup. That will definitely be hopefully a great equalizer in terms of equity for a lot of our teams and get to see them in a very different environment. And I'm not just talking Vietnam. Thank you all again so much for listening. Let's throw it to Jess's interview with Elizabeth and Ileana. Take care. Bye-bye.